This is a response to Leawardseif, your video there. I think I've got your name right this time. But it's the video about the analogy between car and driver and mind and body. You know, and I think quite rightly you point out, and I think you're responding to someone else who also pointed out, that it's a completely bogus analogy. Look at this scenery, by the way, look at this. Cornish beach and the sun just touching those waves, isn't that fantastic? And then look at the sunlight on the top of that hill. Jesus Christ. Anyway, to return to the point, yeah, it's a bogus analogy for a couple of reasons. I mean, firstly, it commits the cardinal sin of logic of reinserting the term that you're trying to find back into the equation. So by saying the, you know, if the question is something like what is a mind, then by using the driver, I know it's not exactly the question, but if it's something like that, then by positing a driver as part of the equation, part of the solution, you know, presumably the driver has a mind, so you as I say, you've reinserted the problem back into the equation again, which leads to an infinite regress. So you couldn't, that's bogus for that reason. The second thing is that it's substance dualism, isn't it? You know, the car is one kind of substance, the driver is another kind of substance, and you're left with kind of classic Cartesian substance dualisms, which, you know, it's been well and truly trounced, I think. I mean, what I do find interesting about not that particular analogy, as I say, but car analogies, which I've used before, but I want to come back to at some point, is, you know, I think there isn't an analogy to be drawn there, which isn't between the car and the driver, but between the car and motion. You know, because the thing about cars is they move, don't they? You know, they move. And sure, that's a kind of dualism. You know, there's the car, and then there's the motion that the car undergoes. But it's not a problematic dualism. You know, physics is full of that kind of dualism. Modern science acknowledges that kind of dualism. There's no problem with it at all. And you can place that back into discussions of mind without any problem at all, I think. You know, you can talk about the brain being like the car and the mind being like the movement that the car makes. Because then, you know, they're not two substances of different kind of orders. They're, you know, they're different kind of functional elements of the whole phenomenon, really. Yeah. I mean, the reason why I'm thinking about this, and I've made a bunch of videos on this recently, is this new book by Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist, which I'm coming back to try and understand better. And this thing about dualism is interesting in that regard, really, because he identifies this I don't know, you probably should know this, but he identifies this structure in the brainstem of all animals, but humans as well, as being the kind of locus for awareness, the most basic form of consciousness, prior to any kind of intentions or applications or the kind of autobiographical layers that build up on top of that and turn this into a particular kind of a person. And he's kind of speculating that that's the you know, that locus, that little spark of awareness in the brainstem, is the thing that we find when we meditate, for example, he seems to be saying. But what I find quite interesting there is that, just to revisit Descartes, you know, Descartes recognised that the problems in his own substance dualism by, you know, he had the res extensa, the extended matter of the mind and body, and then the res cogitans, the stuff of thought. And he always had this big problem of how you resolve those two things. How can the res cogitans, the immaterial stuff of thought, have an effect upon the material stuff of the res extensa, the stuff of the body and matter? That was a big philosophical problem for him, which he never resolved, of course. It isn't resolvable. But he did have a go, you know, and he located it in the pineal gland in the brain. He said that this pineal gland is the point in the brain where matter and mind come together and can influence one another, which is completely bogus, of course. But and I think he only chose that because the pineal gland is one of the only structures in the brain that's singular. Most structures are doubled, aren't they, on each hemisphere, but there's only one pineal gland. But I don't know, interestingly enough, you know, this Damasio stuff, if there's anything in it, and there might not be, of course, that's also a singular structure in the brain, which in a way is a place where things come together, or at least is the bifurcation point in which the material processes of the brain give rise to awareness in its most basic form, and you know, and ultimately allow processes which form what we might think of as the mind and consciousness, you know, with all of its autobiographical and perceptual accretions. So maybe he has something after all, it was just the wrong kind of dualism. Thanks very much.